Okay, we are going to talk about the decision about how much to work versus how much to earn in a given day and how changes in the market can affect that decision. So for that, we need to remember our consumer theory, and we're going to address budget constraints and indifference curves and tangencies in this video. So let's get started. So when someone's considering how many hours to work, they're constrained by the number of hours in a particular day. In this case, we're on planet Earth, so we're talking about 24 hours in a day. Now, if they spend all their time in leisure, they can have at most 24 hours of leisure, or at most, they can spend up to 24 hours working so they can get their wage rate, whatever that is initially. We'll call that W naught. We'll keep things really generic. Times 24. So this is their initial budget constraint, and we'll call that BC naught. That represents all the physical options that they have given the constraints in the world, like their wage rate and 24 hours. It does not at all represent the choices that they make. To understand the choices that they make, we need to see the tangency point between their indifference curve that represents their preferences about how much to consume versus how much to spend in leisure activities like playing, skiing, eating, sleeping, anything you're not being paid to do. So for that, we need to consider the tangency point between that indifference curve and that budget constraint. And at this point, we're going to say point A represents their initial level of leisure consumption, we'll call that L naught, and their initial wage that they earn. So let's call that I1 times their initial wage rate, and 24 minus their leisure. So if they leisured for 10 hours, that leaves 14 hours to work, for instance. So let's look at what happens after their initial W naught, I1, U naught at point A. Okay, so let's look at what happens when there's a market shock. And let's just say this market shock increases their wages. Let's say there's a great new AI program, and as a result, they get a lot more productive, and that increased productivity drives their wages up. And so when their wages increase, that's going to do a couple of different things. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to move their budget constraint, meaning the possibilities in the world have changed as a result of the increase in wage. And so what we see is if we spend all our time in leisure, an increase in the wage doesn't really change the number of hours that we can possibly get in leisure. And so we know this is going to be a rotation rather than a shift in the budget constraint. Now the next question is, does it rotate up or down? And to answer that, we look at the endpoints. So if the wage rate was, say, $10 and it goes to $20, I can easily see that that budget constraint is going to rotate out. So if I spend all my time working, I can now take home a higher income because the wage has increased. So that's the endpoint again. It has nothing to do with the choice that we're going to make. Now we have to figure out what our viable options are. Now for that, you have to remember that indifference curves are convex to the origin and downward sloping, and they do not intersect one another. And so we know that all the points here, and this dot that I drew here at the intersection of U naught and BC1, here, and all the points here are not viable, because if there was a tangency point here or here or here or here or here or here or here, I would draw indifference curves that would cross, and that doesn't work. And so to figure out where our individual is actually going to land when this wage increases, I need the substitution and income effects. And so for that, I'm going to consider first, with the substitution effect, the law of demand. So this is the law of demand in action. What I mean by that is that the substitution effect is our response to a change in the price of whatever the good is. In this case, it's the price of leisure. So the question you have to ask yourself is, did the price of leisure increase or decrease as a result of the increase in the wage rate? Well, let's consider. If I spent a day on the slopes not working, I used to give up W0, or a lower wage rate. Now I give up more because I got this raise. And so the price of leisure really has increased as a result of this particular market shock. And so the question is, what does the law of demand say? Well, if the price of leisure has increased, the law of demand says the quantity consumed should decline. And so what we want to do is draw a substitution effect that shows that we are going to consume less leisure, towards zero leisure, as opposed to 24 hours of leisure. And so to figure out how much less, I need to enter the compensated budget constraint. The compensated budget constraint has a couple of rules. Rule number one is that it's going to be parallel to the new prices, price ratio, so that's going to be parallel to BC1. The tangency point is going to end up on U0, and it's got to reflect whatever my prediction was, which was the price of leisure went up, so the quantity of leisure consumed should go down. And so I'm going to take my piece of paper here, and I'm going to say, line it up with my new price ratio, which is at BC1, and I'm going to shift it out until I come to a point of tangency at U0, and that happens right about here. I'm going to draw that compensated budget constraint. I'm going to call it BC sub C, and it happens at point C at a slightly reduced amount of leisure, and from L0 to LC is a result of that substitution effect. I stop and ask myself, does it meet all my criteria? Well, let's see. Is BC sub C parallel to BC1? Check. Did my point C, my compensated amount, end up on U0? Yes. And does it reflect my predictions that the price of leisure has increased, so the quantity demanded should decline? Yes. Point C represents the amount we would choose if we could hold the effective wealth that this wage increase has created constant. Now, we can't actually do that. We know that when wages go up, you actually are better off. And so as a result, we need to wind up somewhere on BC1 showing that we have increased income possibilities. So to figure out where, I need the income effect. So the income effect depends on whether or not there's a normal or inferior good. So if it's a normal good, as the income increases, we're going to consume more. If it's an inferior good, as income increases, we're going to consume less. Now, leisure is always a normal good. So we know that this is actually a normal good, and we know that income has increased. So as a result, I should increase my consumption of leisure. And so this is like, I always tell my students, this is like the game of life, not chutes and ladders. So you've spun the wheel, and from L0 to LC is the spin that represents the effect of the substitution effect, the effect of the change in relative prices. From LC, now you're spinning again, and how large the income effect is will tell you how far you need to go. And in this case, you need to walk in the direction of having more leisure, not less. Now, let's say in this particular scenario that this person actually ends up working less as a result of this wage increase. And so let's say they're the type of person that just, you have a set number of bills you have to pay. You want to get your lift ticket paid for, you want to pay your rent, you want to pay your tuition, and after that, you're not going to work anymore. And so if you're there, then you're going to end up with the same level of income, but much less hours worked. call that L1 for the ending amount. From LC to L1 is due to the income effect. Point B is where you ultimately end up. I'm going to erase this so we have room. And I'm going to draw an indifference curve that's parallel to U naught, downward sloping, convex to the origin, and just tangent at point B. So I want to notice a couple of things. One, this consumer really is better off working less. In this case, U1 is greater than U naught, where the indifference curve is our proxy for happiness and satisfaction. In addition, at the end of the day, they really did choose to work less and are happier about that. So they're earning no more income than they did before. Their income level is still I1, but it took a lot fewer hours to get there as a result of the wage increase. And so at the end of the day, this is one of the tools that we use to help us figure out how our laborers respond to things like promotions. And you really have to be thoughtful about how you give these kind of promotions, because you can get these odd effects like giving someone a wage increase and then they decline working a Saturday shift. And the reason has to do with the relative strength of the substitution and income effect. In this case, that blue income effect greatly outweighs the substitution effect, and you get this interesting outcome of working less. Hopefully that's helpful for you. Good luck.